Welcome back to the Highway to Healing podcast, all about breaking the stigma of mental health in our communities. Today, we're taking an in-depth look at identifying your triggers. Ready? Let's jump in.
Welcome back. Or if this is your first time with us, welcome. This is the Highway to Healing podcast, where we are changing the narrative around trauma and healing in our communities. Before we get too deep into our topic today, I want to check in with you, Jay. Like, how you feeling?
Yo, man, what's going on, James? Yeah, man, just another day, and I'm feeling pretty good today. Not gonna lie, stressed about some of the other things, but as life is, it's part of life. It's part of this COVID situation, but doing my best to kind of maintain and keep myself focused. How about yourself, brother? How's everything going over there?
Man, I'm riding an emotional high right now. I'll be honest. We dropped the first episode of the podcast on Tuesday. We had an outpouring of support. I actually started a new job on Monday. So this week has been, crazy good for me. But, we fall into this, right? Like, I'm on an emotional high, so I have to balance myself a little bit because always the lows are the points that trigger us. Kind of turning into today's topic. We're talking about triggers and specifically kind of emotional triggers and what changes that for us, like what changes our status, what changes our mood. But kind of to segue back to you, Jay, this was your actual idea, right? The first thing that somebody that's getting into a healing journey should learn is how they work, right? What are their triggers? So can you just explain to me and to the group here why we chose this as our first topic?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I like the fact that triggers is a place to start because even when I work with my students and things, this is where I start. When we start talking about our emotions and start talking about our feelings and the things that we're dealing with, you have to kind of know what makes you tick and what's your trigger. So let's first define what a trigger is. And for the most part, a trigger is just something that causes like a stimulus for you to change in like your emotional state. Most times it's a negative emotion like anxiety, depression, sadness. And so that just understanding what that is and like how now after you're triggered, what happens next, right?
Yes.
So We're talking about being in this state where we're triggered. You just have to go and after you're out of this manic state or upset state, frustrated state, depressed state, you want to kind of go back and figure out what caused you to get there. And so that's why when we talk about triggers, I think it's the first place to start, the great place to start, because of just, understanding that. Because a lot of people just don't think about, how did I get here? I'm depressed, I'm mad, I'm upset, but how did I get here? And it's a place to go back. So that's the first point, just defining what a trigger is. And then the second thing of it is acknowledging and really trying to figure out for yourself when you are triggered. That's huge. Because there's times where you don't even know you're triggered and you're triggered, right? And so when we're talking about this, I just want to start with that piece. I think that was a great place to start, man. And you as well decided like, yeah, that sounds like a great starting place because, for example, we know so many people who probably don't know their triggers.
I'll just take it like when you said it. It made all the sense in the world, but I realized that even through my healing journey so far, I haven't even identified what my triggers are, right? Like, I don't know what puts me in certain states. I've been focusing more on maybe like my happy states, but I need to also focus on those portions where I go into sadness or, maybe the ultimate depression or anger, right? Because those are all triggers, right? All trigger symptoms. So getting into that, really, how did you start identifying what your triggers are to help me out? Like, how do I start?
Oh, well, yeah, man. So like for me, it was journaling, real talk, journaling. At an early age, I think around 6th, 7th grade, it was introduced to me from one of my teachers. We were reading the diary of Anne Frank, and she just introduced this idea of like we should all have our own journal and we should all start journaling. And I used to love to write, right? I wasn't super great with grammar, but I just loved to freely write. I used to write poems, raps, all kind of stuff. So journaling was right up my alley. And so I started journaling, and then as I got older, right, and I started to really think about, like, when I'm upset, what, like, how did I get here? Like, really looking at those pieces back in my journaling, that's where you start to identify, okay, today I was upset, and it's reflecting back to that day. What happened? Like, what happened that day? What happened before that day?
Yeah.
And what happened a year before that? Like, all these little things. Like, you start to try and you try to decipher it, right? You try and break it down because you're like, dang, I was in a bad place in this year or whatever.
Right.
Why was I like that? And so journaling was where it started for me. But there's a lot of ways you can identify your triggers. Journaling is just one, but there are different other ways of just the first one is like naming it, right? Name it. So if I'm upset or if I'm frustrated or if I'm sad, name it and be okay with that emotion. For example, if
hold on, pause there. Hold on. What do you mean being okay with that emotion? What does that mean?
I mean, it's hard for us, man, especially for humans, especially men. Like, it's hard for us to be okay with our emotions because of just like society views. But in your own self, you have to be able to tell yourself it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. Like, it's okay to have these emotions because those are human emotions. And when you are able to name it, what I'm going through, what I'm experiencing right now, you give yourself power because now I know where to start. Okay, I'm right now in this moment, I'm upset. Now you can basically decipher, why am I upset? You know what I mean? Like, if you don't ever acknowledge what emotional state you're in, you're never going to be able to kind of break it down and kind of work through it. I can be walking around pissed off all day, mean mugging, and act like, I'm fine, I'm great, everything's good. Don't worry about me, I'm good. But you really are mad. You're pissed off, right? So, like, you have to be able to name it and then feel it, right? I think naming it and feeling it is the hardest thing to do for men because we're not taught to acknowledge our emotions. We're not taught to feel. We're not given the opportunity to actually feel what we're feeling because we're supposed to go on a day hard, strong, whatever. And so feeling it is important as well as naming it because once you acknowledge it, now I can feel it. All right, this is what this feels like for me. Yeah. When I'm angry, this is what my body physiologically does, right? This is what my emotional state goes, right? Some people shut down. Some people get hyped up, you know? So it's like you have to know what it is you're experiencing and then feel it. And then after you feel it, now we can kind of like really try to like go back, unpack it.
See, I could definitely see that as a starting point where we're talking about, I feel a certain way, right? So let me figure out what that means and then kind of working backwards. Like, I felt this, my heart started pounding and whatever symptoms you're feeling. And then taking that back, like, what happened that my heart started pounding? Someone said such and such to me.
Yeah.
And now, why did them saying that to me make that symptom happen? Because, my dad used to say that to me and that just irks me because of such and such, right? So that's how we work backwards into that trauma that we had before, right?
Yeah, man. I was saying, because that leads me into thinking about, for myself, and one of my biggest triggers is honestly when people try to dismiss me type thing. When I feel like I'm being dismissed or you're not really acknowledging what I'm saying, right? I get triggered with that. Quick, boom, upset. To the, like, on 10, like, instantly, body gets like I'm a Super Saiyan. But I try not to show it, but I'm like, yo, you're not really listening to me, right? And it really upsets me. But like I said, when I went back and figured out why is that such a trigger for me, it's because of what we talked about before about having that suppressed voice in your home. Right. So in the moment, I didn't realize that's what it was. I just feel like, yo, you're not listening. Like, you need to listen to me. But it's not really that the person's not listening to you. It's the fact that you had this emotional, traumatic experience where you feel like you weren't heard. So now, when you're talking to your friends or your significant other, or just in general with people, coworkers, is sometimes when you don't feel heard, you can get triggered. Right. Now, like, I mean, that's just one example, right? But there's so many different types of things that can trigger you. And I think it's important that we kind of discuss that too, because some people get triggered from like anniversary dates, right? If I had a bad experience within a relationship, and for whatever reason, in this experience in this relationship, we had like a bad breakup or something. Every time that breakup day comes, they can be like, oh, I'm depressed, or I'm sad,
Yeah.
or lost.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That's important. It's internal and external factors that can trigger us, right? It's such a hashtag term now, like triggered. But
Songs,
it is
music,
external and internal, right? I could just be in a space and it will bring back memories, whether it's good or bad. And it could be, oh, now I'm triggered, either positive or negative. And we had this conversation, and I was telling you, like, I've been focusing on my positive triggers, right? Like what puts me in a space to be positive, to be more creative, to be more loving to my people, right? So I've been focusing on my positive triggers, and that was something, even when I have conversations today, we're like, triggered is kind of just supposed to be emotional, negative terms. So it's rewiring my brain also to flip the switches that will trigger positivity into my life, as well as trying to avoid those switches that are channeling negative emotions like anger or sadness. And I think it's important to know also that we can't avoid a lot of these things. All of these things, we're not going to go through life and just completely avoid a whole section, right? I'm not going to avoid the city of Alameda because I had a breakup in Alameda, and Alameda reminds me of bad things. Because there are a lot of positive things in Alameda too. So if I look at it that way, then I just will never have fun in Alameda. So it's looking at those things and figuring out, like, how can I better resolve my issue so that I can continue to live my life peacefully.
Man, absolutely, man. Because, like you said, there are people, let's be honest. Like, at times, there's a lot of us, even myself, where that happens. Right, a song can come on and it can trigger certain emotions.
Yep, change
right.
That.
You can go to a certain a certain restaurant in a certain city that you had past experiences with, and it can trigger you to have happy emotions or some negative emotions. Right, you can get anxiety. Oh man, I remember when last time I was here, wasn't so good.
I have
little things like that.
Thing. Me and my mom have a restaurant that we went to when I was kind of starting to express myself more, where we had some very emotional conversations twice in a row, same restaurant. Yeah. So we decided, you know what, we're going to skip that. We're going to skip that restaurant. We're not going back there. So, that's going to start a real conversation. So we're not going to go there today. We're going to go somewhere else.
It's funny, but that's exactly what human nature, right? That's what we do, man. And I don't know. I think it's interesting when you look at it like that, because there's two ways you can look, like you said. You can look at the positive side of things, and you can look at it from a negative standpoint. And when we talk about triggers, like you said, for the most part, I think people dwell on the negative side of it, because that's just where, the word even trigger sometimes makes people think straight negative, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, you can be triggered to motivate you. You can be triggered to push forward. You can be triggered to persevere. So it's just changing that narrative and controlling what you can control. Like that space, like you said, with you and your mom, we can control not going there, because for whatever reason, this space brings up a lot of deep dive emotional conversations that we're not ready for right now. This second, we want to have a light lunch,
right?
But it's just it's little things like that, man. It's cool.
Yeah. So for me, when I'm now focusing on more of my negative triggers, right, or the triggers that bring out anger or sadness, especially in maybe like a relationship or just a conversation where I'm in the moment. How do I, one, recognize that I'm being triggered, and how do I act now so that I don't cause further conflict, right? Because if something triggers me that brings out anger, maybe now I'm lashing out on the person that I'm talking to. Yeah. Where it's not actually them that's triggering me. It's that they're triggering my trigger.
Yeah. Right. And so now you're going into like just understanding coping, and coping strategies and coping skills, because with our emotions, good or bad, there's coping that has to go with that. Right. You don't want to get too high. They tell you don't want to get too low. And you have to cope in between. And so when you're in these emotions, like I said, after you're able to get to the first step of naming it and feeling it, Now I'm able to kind of deal with it in terms of, okay, let me go back, let me analyze the situation, in terms of just me, right? You want to focus on yourself because you can only control yourself. So what could I have done differently in this situation to either one, not get frustrated and angry, or not to project my frustration and anger onto my spouse or my homie or my coworker. And it takes a lot of diving in and just self-reflection with that. And a lot of those times, that's why they say journaling is a good thing, because it's hard to have that honest conversation with yourself about you and what you do and your actions.
Yeah.
But people they're way more honest when they journal, right? Because there's this term that my teacher used to use back in the day. She said, "Let the pen bleed," right? So sometimes you feel like you don't want to bleed or you don't want to cry outside physically, but you can let the pen bleed, where now you're putting all your emotions in this journal, and now you're breaking this stuff down. You get what I'm
Sounds
saying?
like
So
a
now you
Jay-Z
can.
song.
It is. It's weird 'cause when Jay-Z said that. It's funny because when Jay-Z said that, I was like, yo, I heard this like when I was in 7th grade. That's crazy, you know? So I gotta let the song cry, you know? Gotta let the song cry.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of coping, right? And so there's so many different coping strategies I like. And when we talk about coping, I want to make sure we're very clear. There are healthy ways to cope and there are unhealthy ways to cope. And a lot of us will go to like unhealthy ways to cope, and myself included. I was a big unhealthy coper, like
First, yeah.
Instantly. So, you know, some of those unhealthy ways, just so we can acknowledge them and address them, is like, you know, substance abuse, right? People just I forget. I'm gonna get high. I'm gonna smoke. I'm gonna drink, or I'm gonna do whatever. Yeah, I'm gonna eat. I'm overeat, whatever. Like, you know, I'm gonna sit here and binge watch TV for 10 hours and just cry and eat ice cream. Like unhealthy. Like for those, that's one part of like an unhealthy coping strategies. Another one is just avoidance. I was a big avoider with some of this stuff. It's like, if I just avoid it and I just focus on positive and just positive, it'll go away. No, it won't go away. You can suppress it for a little bit, but it'll eventually come back. Yeah. Right? And so like avoiding it is still unhealthy. Now in a moment, if you need to avoid something for a short period of time, fine. But if you just try to avoid it and just leave it forever, it's not going to work. Right? It's not going to work. And then like isolating, like a lot of people isolate too. Instead of finding someone, even if it's not the person you're dealing with, but finding someone kind of like talk through this stuff with, they'll just isolate and they'll just in their own head. And I've done that as well. I just, I'm just be quiet, isolate myself, and just thinking, boom.
Yeah, well, definitely, I would say for us, you know, being African-American males, isolation is a big thing, right? Because who do we talk to about our negative emotions, right? Who can we say, I'm feeling this way today, or this made me feel this way today? Even when we see it in media, right? There's not a lot of these conversations going on.
No,
it's like,
not at all.
Oh, you see the man who came from this horrible situation and now he's angry all the time and he robs people and whatever. Like, that's how they portray us. So when you see those types of, you know, I don't know even really the word for it. When you see those types of figures that represent us, like, how do we take that away, take that power away, and take our power back and start talking about our own emotions in a constructive way, especially when we're angry, especially when we're in a low, especially when we're, you know, riled up.
Oh man, it's interesting that you say that too, because I just read something not too long ago. I can't remember what the article was, but I just read something not too long ago where it was talking about just that, where we have to understand where that comes from too. You know, there are times where men feel like we're in a safe space and we will communicate things that we're going through. And then individuals that's supposedly in our safe space will use that information against us. And so for now, you have been conditioned to feel like, nope, that's it. I'm done. I'm never sharing my information with nobody again, because
right.
Now they're using it against me. And now, like, I don't even know how to cope with that. I trusted this person, and now this person like abused my trust. I'm done. Right? Like, So I think that part is kind of like the beginning part till we get to your question, because in order to fix those figures and like remove those figures from our community, we have to create more like healthy, safe spaces for men to just talk, right? Just talk and not feel judged. There's plenty of times in life we talk to people, but after you talk to them, you feel like, dang, man, maybe I should not have said this. Maybe I disclosed too much.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to feel that way, right? And the reason why we feel that way is because of how they're going to use this information. Are they going to use this information to, go against me? Are they going to use this information to tell 17 other people that I don't know or whatever? Mm-hmm. Or let's just keep this very honest. Or they're going to use this information and tell it to a female that we're both interested in. Like, those little things happen, right?
Yeah.
Let me go pillow talk this to her. And so it's just a lot of that that mistrust that we have amongst groups, that when you find your group, that's why a lot of men go to it. Like, I have a small group of friends where we do that. We are able to talk freely. There's some times where it's like, hey, look, bro, they get on you, they talk a little mess, but it's still like we understand each other. Like, look, this is our safe space, bro. Let's keep what we talk about in here amongst us. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And then also just the aspect of that, of a safe space, is so important. It's so important for men and for humans in general.
Yeah.
It's the only way you're going to be able to get stuff and vent and get it off your chest to the point where now you can actually accept it and grow from it and develop skills to move on.
Right. And that's definitely another layer, right? So the journaling is the first layer. Maybe it's the easiest one to start right away, because anyone could grab, a piece of paper or a journal. I actually like the idea of having a physical journal better. Obviously, with all the technology, we're like, I could just put it in my notes section, right, on my phone. But having physical journal that I can touch and I can go through and read and make even notes on, right? Especially starting, because a lot of it is I don't even know where these things are coming from, or I don't even know my patterns yet. So writing down when you do feel a certain way and then going back, and now I can establish those patterns. I can see, okay, this happens consistently when someone does this, right? Yeah. So now I'm establishing the patterns. So now I can take a deeper dive and figure out where all that's coming from. But now taking that next step and finding that safe space or that person that you can talk to about these things that can help you with even other coping mechanisms to take it to the next level. Like, when I'm in this situation, I know, all right, I just need to take a deep breath. I need to excuse myself. I need to have a constructive way to communicate that, where I'm not then starting a fight, right? Because if I'm just telling my partner, you know what, I'm out, just close the door. Now I've probably created another problem when I'm trying to avoid the problem. So having a way where I can communicate that to my partner, like, I feel this certain type of way right now. Just give me like 5 minutes to breathe, to think about it, to dwell on it, and come back, and we can have a constructive conversation about this. Just being able to, it might not be those words, it might be other words, but finding a way to communicate that with whoever you're dealing with. It could be a coworker that you're talking to. Like, all right, you gave me that information. Cool. Like, let me dwell on it for like a couple minutes, and I'll get back to you before lunch, after lunch, whatever. Right? Just take yourself out of the situation peacefully. So when you come back,
is the key.
They're not on, full arms. Like, all right, I'm ready for this fight that's about to happen. Right? Because we're trying to find ways to cope where we're avoiding fights or avoiding extra negative repercussions from our emotions.
And it's key that you said making sure that you're able to have a constructive conversation, and then also checking in with that other person, making sure their mental state is able to have that conversation, right? Because there's a lot of times where we might feel like, okay, I'm good now. It's time to talk about it. The other person's not there yet. The other person's not there yet. And you're like, well, I'm ready to talk. well, this person's not, this
Yeah.
person's not ready. So I think that was a good piece that you said, because that's key. And then, in schools, I do a lot of restorative practices and things like that with my students, and we do circles, and we'll break that down another time. But it's the same principle we practice with our students of having that empathy in terms of, even when you're frustrated and angry, you have to be able to know, like, this person is still upset. They haven't came down yet. So we're not going to address this quite yet. We're glad that you were able to come down and, de-escalate yourself. Now we're giving them the same amount of respect and time and space to do the same for their own self, right? Because we all de-escalate, or we deal with things at different time frames. And so you want to respect people's time to cope and process and manage their emotions. And I'm sorry, I've done that plenty of times. All right, it's time to talk. No, man. And I've been trying to work on that. Like, so you know what I'm saying? Like, even that, just trying to work on, like, yo, pause, stop, let these other people deal with it as much as they can, and then we can come back, Crazy stuff, brother.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
I mean, I feel like we all had that. I feel like we all had that moment, right, where we're in some kind of argument, whether it be with our parents or a significant other, whatever, and we're like, you know what, I'm ready to talk. We're talking about it right now. They're like, well, yeah, but I'm still upset. If we talk right now, it's still going to be a fight. Yeah.
Yep.
We definitely all have that. It's not going to be
productive.
So,
but there's also, so we're talking about coping. There's also things that we can do too in terms of coping that I used to use as well, which is like exercising, right? Football became my coping strategy when I was younger. We able to get out my physical exertion, as well as it was like a way to escape for a second, and now you're able to de-escalate as well. And then of course, since we're talking about mental health, finding coping strategies and things like that. Talking to a counselor or talking to a therapist or finding a support group. Those are all also positive ways to find some coping, So whatever works for you, these are not the only things. There's so many things out there. Whatever works for you is the important piece, and knowing what helps you get to a very positive place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing, right? Is how does it affect you personally? Because my techniques won't be the same as yours, and so on and so forth. But definitely the journaling is number one way to start, because we need to identify what we're even talking about. Because I had that conversation with, my people, was like, if I go to a therapist, what do I even talk about? Like, I don't even know what I'm going to say to them. Like, what trauma am I even working through right now? And I know they're supposed to help you with that, right? But being the person that I am, super perfectionist, like, I got to make sure that this is right. Like, I need to have my topics down before I even go in there and for my hour session, because I want to make sure that hour is perfect hour. I'm gonna make sure I'm getting everything I can out of that hour. So let me have these topics down. So identifying what we're even talking about, if identifying, like you said, what my triggers are, so that I can then move on to how do I fix these things, or how do I keep moving on from there. I really want to get to this part. Your journal. How did you start your journal, as far as, what are you writing down when you go into the journal? Because I could say, we need to journal these things all day. But if I don't know what I'm writing, for me personally, if I don't know what I'm writing, I'm just going to be looking at a blank piece of paper, like, today I was upset, period.
So there's ways you can do that as well when you're journaling. But it's also like just one, like I said before, let the pen bleed. So whatever you're feeling at the moment, write it. So, when I was doing my journaling back in the day, it was, man, I'm fucking pissed off, and just explaining the situation, right? Explaining why you're so upset, or what the situation was, and breaking that down. Or it was like, yo, okay, this happened, and you're going through like a sequence of events. And then sometimes when you get to a place in the journey where now it's, okay, now let me dive back, and you're writing that as well. But I would just tell people, just write. Don't think, just write. Because a lot of times, especially myself, I'm an overthinker when it comes to my writing. When I just go and I just write freely, things come out that you never would think would come out. Because you're subconsciously writing what's really bothering you. You're not really thinking about it. When you go in with like a plan, all right, today I'm going to write about this, then
Yeah, that's how I am.
now you're struggling. But if you go in with the idea of like, I'm just going to write how I'm feeling, where my personal state is at, good, bad, or indifferent, or just what you just go in there and you let that pen bleed, and so many things will come out of that. And when you go back, it might look like gibberish and it might not look like a professional journal, but that's not what you're aiming for, right? You're aiming for to get this emotion and to get this feeling out.
I mean, that in itself is hard because I'm not used to talking about my emotions, even to myself. It's like, I have to recognize that I was even in an emotional state today, and not just every day is the same day. Like, how was your day? Oh, it's good. It's the same. It's the same as, the day is the same as every other day. But no, it's not, right? I've had peaks and valleys in my day, and it's kind of recognizing those peaks and valleys and why I peaked and why I valued that day, and how can I make sure there's more peaks than valleys in the future, if that's possible, and moving on from there. But I want to give the people some homework. So you have some good ideas on what we can do from here as far as between now and the next podcast, what people can do to actually further their healing journey here.
Yeah, man, I think for a lot of people, especially if you're trying to get into journaling or you're trying to figure this journaling thing out, the first thing you need to do is just get something. Get a notebook, get a pad, get an actual fancy journal for those people who like the fancy journals. If you want to pay for one, go ahead, but you don't need it. You can go get a 50-cent bound notebook, and just start using that. And if you're one of those individuals where you like James, you say, like, I don't even know where to start, just write in your journal in the beginning, highlight in a low point, right? Highlight in a low point, because that'll get you at least started. All right, what's my highlight today? It'll get you to start thinking, because a lot of times people are like, well, I didn't have a highlight today, right? And now you have to really dive in and be like, no, I need to have a highlight today. Okay, let me really dissect what my day was like and what was a high moment for me, a high point. And then, what was a low moment? What was a low point? And just those simple starting there will begin that process, because you have to start really understanding it and processing and thinking about it. And then it'll help that pen bleed, like I said, to help that pen to start bleeding, because now you're really trying to dive in.
Yeah.
What was a high point? What was a low point? How do I want tomorrow to feel? Just little things. And then plus there's a bunch of, like I said, there's a bunch of journals out there where they give you prompts as well. So
yes,
if you want to go buy one of those fancy ones,
yes,
they have tons of like points and things to talk about for the day or focuses. But if you just want to get like an empty pad, that's a very simple way to start.
I mean, that's great. That's amazing points. I want to touch on that journal, that prompt journal that you were talking about there. That prompt journal is everything for people like myself, where it's like, I don't know what to write, so tell me. And we're going to go into kind of more of that, because I want to bring one on for our next one, because this was actually a 2-part, right? It was knowing yourself and loving yourself. So our next podcast is going to be more on the loving yourself. So I actually have a great prompt journal for that that's been recommended by amazing people around me. And it tells you about, like, what were 3 things that were amazing today, and getting into that, right? So more of the positivity, because I love positivity. We talked about toxic positivity too much, so we'll talk about that also in the next one. But we're going to talk about all those things in our next podcast. This is an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you, Jay, coming on again.
As always, brother.
Look out for us, because we are really going to change this. The trauma and the healing that our people need, we're going to go through that, all through this on this podcast.
Let's roll through it together, people. Thanks for listening to the Highway to Healing podcast with your host, James Parker, and myself, Jay Tobe. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive on identifying your triggers and developing some coping strategies. Join us next week as we discuss loving yourself. As always, please follow us on Instagram at the highway, 2 healing, as well as on YouTube. Follow us, like, subscribe, leave a comment, as well as you can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Thank you guys. We appreciate it. See you next week.